Hello and welcome to week 6 of semester 1 2020. In week 6 we're doing lecture 5, the ethics of consumption. Remember that our structure we have over the first 2 weeks we have 1A and 1B, which is why the lecture number appears one lower than the week number. Okay, so what are we doing today? We're looking at the ethics of consumption, which is about how companies deal with consumers and how consumers deal with companies. Now, obviously, there are also business customers as well as broader consumers that may be purchasing from a company as well. So sometimes the companies or the customers are not just private consumers, they're company consumers as well. These lecture notes are based on the instructor resources from the textbook, but I have once again built on them, and as you'll notice there are a number of videos for you to watch that support the lectures and provide you with real-world examples. In fact, for Objective 5, we're actually relying on an external presentation, a short external presentation that talks about the legal structures and also gives you some specific examples of court cases related to advertising law in Australia. And there's also a couple of links we've provided as well. I've provided as well about advertising standards. So there's a range of resources for this 2 hours in this online lecture. And once again, there are tutorial activities for next week and a Moodle forum activity for next week that you can see on the unit website. Now in today's structure, just to keep things simpler, what I've decided to do is deal with Objective 1, 2, 3 in one block and Objective 4, 5, 6 in a second block. And when I'm doing that, that means that the lecture will be slightly longer than it would normally be in each section. When I'm doing an online lecture, I try to keep them to about 20 minutes or so. So these lecture components may be slightly longer, but then we also have the other video activities for you to look at. So let's look at what our objectives for today is, what our objectives for this module are. On successful completion of the lecture and the associated activities, students will be able to discuss the issue of product safety, including the legal and moral responsibilities of manufacturers, discuss the pros and cons of government regulation designed to protect consumers, including the issue of paternalism, discuss the responsibilities of business to consumers concerning product quality, prices, labelling, and packaging. And as you can see, those 3 things sort of overlap with each other. The legal and moral issues affect the whole lecture, but those things about regulation and protection of consumers and packaging and prices, quality labelling are one group or one area that we're talking about, which is why I've grouped them together. Then in the second part of the lecture, what we're going to do is look at deceptive and morally questionable advertising techniques, the role and nature of regulatory bodies, and there's a website for you to go and look at, including looking at the advertising to children, and we're going to look at the social desirability of advertising in general, whether it has a positive or whether it's a negative or manipulative feature of our economic system. So we're all consumers. We've all experienced advertising. We've probably all been tricked by some form of advertising or other form of advertising. We've all probably had concerns about product quality or prices or labelling or packaging when we buy a product that doesn't achieve everything it should achieve. And we all probably want to know, well, what should we do legally? But this course is about ethics and social responsibility. So we're looking more broadly than just looking at the legal aspects of the relationship between business and the consumer. We're looking at the underlying ethical and corporate social responsible requirements of companies operating in the marketplace. Now, once again, when we're looking at ethics, and corporate social responsibility, we know we've got different frameworks by which we can analyse the ethics and the corporate social responsibility of a business. So we have to keep those things in our mind in the background, and those things will be what we will explore in the tutorials. So let's start with objective 1. Discuss the issue of product safety, including the legal and moral responsibilities of manufacturers. Businesses always have more knowledge than consumers, than customers, about the nature of their product. Businesses should sell products that are safe to their customers. Customers depend on businesses to satisfy their needs. Businesses therefore have a responsibility to consumers because of that dependence. The business has more knowledge. The business is satisfying a customer's need. The customer is in an independent relationship with the business. But when we look at the way businesses operate, when we look at the statistics across Australia, across the world, we find that thousands of people are hospitalised owing to illness or injuries caused by dangerous products. Now, are companies the sole do companies have the sole responsibility for the safety of their customers? No, people have responsibility as well. We all know that on the bottom of some coffee cups at McDonald's, it says caution, contents hot. Clearly the business is warning you because in the past it's been sued successfully for not warning people that the contents of a hot coffee is hot and therefore may burn you. So the nature of product safety is a dual responsibility, but the onus actually rests with the company largely. But product safety is influenced by another factor. What happens when consumers demand unsafe products? What happens when consumers demand unsafe products? Cigarettes are unsafe. Cigarettes cause cancer. Clear evidence that occurs. Cigarettes are a legal product. Does business have a moral responsibility not to sell cigarettes? Where does that moral responsibility end? Cigarette companies, when I was growing up, used to advertise cigarettes as being fashionable and exciting and positive. They used to have doctors smoking on TV screens telling us how safe it was. They used to publish scientific report after scientific report after scientific report demonstrating that there was no link between cancer and cigarettes. We all know cigarettes cause cancer now, but people still smoke. Who is responsible for that? Who is responsible for the health outcomes? Is it the individual? Is it the company? Is it the government for not regulating the product well enough? But wait, cigarettes aren't the only thing that causes cancer. Ham and processed meats are a known carcinogen. We don't have warnings on those. So what do we do about consumer demand for unsafe products? Well, let's look at some of the ways that we can view this. And the first way that we can view this is our second objective, which is what are the pros and cons of government regulations? Now, regulation may or may not be effective. Regulation is law or a standard. You can't sell alcohol to people under 18. And businesses are so concerned about this that they'll ask for ID if you look under 25. You know, it may be unbelievable looking at me, but I used to get carded into my mid-30s. It was quite annoying. But what else do we know about this area? Do regulations work? Do people get around regulations? Fireworks are banned. But at Chinese New Year, I hear fireworks all the time in my local area. Cigarettes can only be sold to people 18, but I'm sure that you know people, even maybe yourself, that smoked at high school. People drink routinely before they're 18. People without driving licenses decide to drive. So even with things that are broadly acceptable as societal standards, and therefore in laws and regulations, some people seek to circumvent them. Public opinion and political interest may interfere with those regulatory efforts as well. So, for example, we all know that we should be self-isolating. We all know that we should be limiting our exposure to others. We all know that we should keep 6 feet away from everybody else. We all can see, with the smallest bit of analysis, that social distancing, let's call it physical distancing because we can still connect socially online, is restricting the growth of COVID-19 in every country that it is in fact being systematically implemented in. New Zealand looks like it's eliminated or close to eliminating COVID-19. Australia has flattened the curve. But then compare that this week with the right-wing organised protests, right-wing factional protests organised by Trump supporters and other right-wing interest groups in Michigan, protesting the fact that they, because they were not sick, should not have to socially isolate. And the amount of abuse, and I'm going to put a couple of videos up showing this protest so that you understand exactly what we're talking about, that health officials were subject to. And the mixed messages being sent for political reasons by the President of the United States. So even as something as clearly outlined, as clearly presented, public opinion and political interests may interfere with the regulatory efforts of the organisation, of the country. The same thing can apply to public safety. Public opinion, media, advocacy groups, and the prospect of class action lawsuits can persuade companies to take particular issues of product safety more seriously. So political pressure is stronger than regulation in many cases. Though political pressure may also change regulations, but regulations need to exist if they're to be enforced, and then they need to be enforced. And there are many regulations that are not systemically enforced. And frequently, the need of an organisation, the need of a company to make profit takes priority over consumer welfare, the welfare of the customers in regulated industries, so they circumvent the regulations, but also in self-regulating industry. What's a self-regulating industry? A self-regulating industry is an industry that's regulated by an industry body that's been formed by the members of that industry. Sometimes it involves other stakeholders as well, like consumer groups or government. So if we look at some of the self-regulating bodies that exist around the world, the broadcast television industry in America is self-regulating. They don't have a unique censorship process. They have different censorship processes in each of the main broadcast networks. CBS has a stronger, and even a list of words you can't use on CBS, and it's more stronger. It's more strong. It's stronger. More strong. I can't speak English today. It's stronger than the other two networks, but the other two networks, compared with Australia, have quite strong industry regulations. Even though there is regulation about the broadcast industry in Australia, most of the regulation is in fact is self-regulated. There are associations that define what free range is or isn't. There are for chickens. There are associations that define what organic is and what organic isn't. There are associations that set standards for insulation, which actually only has 3 companies in Australia in it, and so on and so forth. Pardon me. Need a soft drink. My voice is going. So we have questions of the effectiveness of regulation and questions about the effectiveness of self-regulation. So if regulation and self-regulation are not, or self-regulation are not enough to ensure that companies comply, and we can show that public opinion, public opinion that doesn't support regulation, can have a negative effect on the enforcement and compliance with regulation, and public opinion that does support particular behaviours through media, consumer advocacy groups and other forms of public opinion, can pressure companies to behave in a particular way, to behave in a more positive way, a way that protects the interests of consumers. But neither of those things are enough to support regulation. How do we support regulation? Who bears responsibility for safety? And that's our next question. We're going to look at the responsibilities of business for product quality, for prices, for labelling, and for packaging, and the approaches that firms can take to enable effective regulation. And this is an overlap between Objective 2 and Objective 3. So let's start by looking at the approaches to safety. There are 4 broad approaches for safety: the market approach, the contract approach, the due care approach, and the social cost approach. In the market approach to safety, there's the assumption that there is a competitive market. A competitive market needs more than one provider of a product or service. And that those providers of products and services are not colluding with each other. Consumers are willing and able. It assumes that consumers are willing and able to make their own decisions regarding product safety. It assumes that manufacturers will provide the level of product safety that consumers desire and are willing to pay for, and that effectively the law of supply and demand, the market approach we talked about last week, the shareholder focus on profitability of the company will ensure that product safety is in place. The second approach is the contract approach. Now, in the contract approach, it says that the relationship between a consumer and a corporation is a legal, contractual one. The corporation is offering a product to you. You are entering that contract willingly, and therefore, as the consumer, and the terms of the contract have to be met. And that product safety is an explicit part or an implicit part of the contract. And the level of product safety is implicit or explicit. This approach absolves manufacturers of responsibility for the product's failure to absolves the manufacturer's responsibility to check all aspects of the product, because it can be used to shift responsibility from the corporation to the consumer. Last week, well, actually it was 2 weeks ago, I bought a water bottle. What I thought was a stainless steel water bottle from Decor at Woolworths. It had on the side of that bottle a sticker that said it would keep cold liquids cold for 24 hours, hot liquids hot for 12 hours. And I thought, okay, it's like a thermos, which I know is a brand, but it's like a thermos flask. That will be good. I need one of those. I can bring a cup of coffee to work with me. It's probably more than 2 weeks ago now that I think about it. It was before we went into lockdown. Now, I didn't really read everything on it, but I read the little label when I took it off. Not the label that was stuck on, but the little hanging label. And the bottom of the label in really small print was, "Do not use for hot liquids." The fact that it would keep things hot for 12 hours and cold for 24 hours, which was how it was being communicated to me, did not fit the safety advice, don't put hot liquids in it. So if I put hot liquids in it, even though I bought it thinking I could, now I know I can't, I would probably be responsible for any damage I cause to myself by putting a hot liquid in the bottle. So I guess I'm just using that for water now. And imagine now, if we were live, I'd be showing you this bottle and you'd be going, oh, how stupid was he to buy that bottle without reading the label? Why didn't he take care? The due care approach acknowledges that there's an inequality between the consumer and the manufacturer. So the manufacturer needs to have produce a product that's safe in line with their specialist knowledge that the consumer would not necessarily have. And finally, there's the social cost approach. Safety is an economic issue. Social costs are incorporated into the price of the product. Environmental costs should also be included. And manufacturers would make products as safe as possible if they were held liable for all the damage caused by those products. So do these approaches to safety actually work? Do these protect consumers? So we're sort of, as I mentioned, this discussion affects both Objective 2, the pros and cons of government regulation, and Objective 3, who's responsible. So the market approach is based on open, unregulated market and the concepts of humans as rational and informed consumers. Are humans rational? That's why we're going to show the protester video. Michigan protester video. Are they informed? Do they have the necessary knowledge? That's the criticism. The contract approach also assumes equality of knowledge and assumes equality of bargaining power. That the consumer has the same level of power over the nature of the product being provided as the supplier does. Think about your own environment. Who has more power, the landlord or the renter? Who has more knowledge, the landlord or the renter? The due care approach has the weakness that it becomes very difficult to judge if a manufacturer has met its specific obligations. And this is why you get things like labels telling you that the coffee is hot at McDonald's, which I think is a bit of an overkill, but I know why it isn't an overkill. You should have told me that the floor was wet when I was walking on it, so I wouldn't slip over. And finally, the social cost approach. It's difficult for manufacturers to guard against all liabilities, and it's difficult for government to regulate and cost all external factors in the price of producing a product. And it also absolves the consumer from any responsibility. And is that fair? Do people not have the need to use something, the need to take care when they're using a product or a service? All right. So that's safety. As I said, safety was overlapping both the first and the second objective. We're now going to deal with the other issues covered in the second objective, and the first of these is responsibility of business. Business should give safety the priority warranted by the product. Business should abandon any misconception that accidents occur exclusively as a result of product misuse, and that it's therefore absolved from any responsibility to them. A business must monitor the manufacturing process. So business, if they're behaving in a corporately social responsible way, regardless of all those approaches, still have this need, this requirement, in my opinion, and when you match it against most of the ethical frameworks and corporate social responsibility frameworks that take into account everything beyond pure economic advantage of business, pure economic goals of business, business needs to be able to do those things and needs to change its behaviour. Product safety staff should review their marketing strategy and advertising to ensure that safety problems are clearly, or safety issues are clearly communicated, and that people are provided the knowledge to be able to use the product safely, and that the expectations that the consumer has of the product match the reality of the product's performance. They should provide written information about product performance to consumers, and companies should investigate consumer complaints in a way that's designed to resolve and improve the quality of and safety of the product, rather than to prevent legal action occurring or to dismiss the concerns raised by consumers. So, those are the safety-related responsibilities of business. Now let's look at the other 4 areas of responsibility of business under Objective 3 that businesses have. Businesses have responsibility for the quality of their product, for the prices of their product, and linked to that is price fixing and uncompetitive behaviour, and for the labelling and packaging of their product. The product should do what it is supposed to do, what it claims to do. There's an implied warranty. The product is fit for its intended purpose, and an express warranty explicitly stated claims about the product. Now, have I tried to return my water bottle to Woolworths saying the sticker and the label didn't match what I'd purchased? Well, no, it wasn't. It was half price. In the end, I thought it was the time it would take me to do that worth the $10 I'd get back. No. So one of the things about product quality and whether or not it's enforceable comes down to the motivation of the customer. So product quality is one thing. The second area to look at as a responsibility is pricing. Now we know that there's psychological pricing and things where you have things like $99 instead of $100. These strange end numbers, end cents, to give the impression it's cheaper than it is. People see $9.88 and they think $9. The pricing, psychological pricing of providing a cheap air ticket one way, and then when you try to come back it's just expensive, so you've bought your $250 ticket back to Malaysia, and then to get back to Australia at the end of it, it costs you $750 rather than just marketing it as a $995 ticket. But there's also a range of concealed costs that firms sometimes use to give the impression of lower costs than they actually have. Some of those things are predatory pricing. All the airlines have signed an agreement related to how they deal with the add-on costs and fees, progressive pricing when you're ordering a ticket. There's also been legislation related to the maximum amount that you're allowed to be charged as a service fee for using a credit card. Because sometimes and to process orders, sometimes the order processing fees under the old airline system was $17 each way on a $50 ticket. And you can still walk around and find some Coke vending machines that charge you 25 cents for a $2 Coke, which is above what the maximum you're allowed to charge is. So, concealed costs like delivery costs, and particularly cumulative delivery costs, which are things that people are starting to find out in some suppliers. Bunnings had a problem with their computer system that everything was being charged at $44 per delivery, per box, as distinct from $44 per delivery. But there are some firms that give the impression that delivery is free, and then delivery is free, but it ends up costing you money because there's a hidden charge. There's processing fees. In Australia, you're required to include the tax explicitly in the cost being advertised, while in other countries and some states and other countries, the tax is an additional fee. So these concealed costs are important things to operate with. There's also the issue of price fixing. Price fixing is illegal. An example of price fixing was the fire extinguisher companies. The fire extinguishers that you have and the sprinkler systems that you have in buildings. Hey, if we were in class on campus, we'd be able to look up and see them. Maybe some of you are at places that have those type of sprinkler systems. There was an issue that the three major companies in Australia were colluding with each other to set the price to not compete for particular installations, so that the price would be pushed up for all of them in each of the installations they decided to do, so not compete in a price competitive way, but also do the same thing for servicing and support contracts. Same thing happened within the courier industry, so much so that one of the rationales for Qantas and Australia Post to create Star Trek, which is now completely owned by Australia Post, was to have an understanding of what the real market costs were within the trucking industry that they were using to link to their air distribution and airmail, and interstate transportation of mail, interstate transportation of packages. So again, companies were agreeing not to go after each other's customers, effectively price fixing. Price fixing can be explicit or implicit. Sometimes companies send out price signals to indicate what their pricing point will be to try to influence the market to move up to a more profitable level. Anti-competitive behaviour may be ways that firms communicate about the costs and warranties of products. Car companies, vehicle manufacturers are now not able to indicate that vehicles serviced external from the dealership network, for example, no longer have warranties. Setting artificially high prices for consumables after the product has been sold. So you buy a printer and then find out that suddenly it costs you too much to replace the ink. All of those are violations of the concept of a free and competitive market. And lastly, within our discussion of Objective 3, labelling and package. Labelling and packaging. Is there anything about the package that is likely to mislead the customer? And, the outside box staying a particular size, and then inside you find there's a packet that's much smaller inside to mislead you that you're buying a packet of a similar size. Product may settle during transportation is another way that other companies try to limit the perception that you've underfilled a package. Have you as a company, have you as a manager, have you as an organisation clearly and specifically identified the nature of the product in an appropriate part of the label? Is the net quantity prominently displayed? Is the label readily understandable for those wishing to compare prices? In Australia, supermarkets are required to give a price per litre, a price per 100 grams, a price per sheet for toilet paper, so that people can make a comparison between the different sizes and packaging of a product. Voluntarily, the manufacturers of washing liquid, laundry liquid, have put how many washes their package actually does. Because comparing per litre is different, which they're required to do, cost per litre, is they now have to, that many firms have realised that doesn't provide because of pressure from consumer groups, that didn't provide a way to accurately compare the different products. The same thing doesn't happen in dishwashing liquid, I note. Are ingredients listed so they can be readily recognised and understood, or are there sort of pseudo names used for things like sugar or gluten or fibre? Can we indicate and represent the percentage of the contents that is filler as distinct from the percentage of the contents that is the active ingredient? Okay, so that's objectives 1, 2 and 3 of this lecture. Look at the supporting videos and then come back and we'll do the second part of the lecture, which focuses mainly on issues related to advertising.